welcome everybody to a very special episode of Book and Spade. I am joined today by my very good friend, Aubree Helton.
Hello.
And today we're going to carry on a bit of a tradition that Aubree introduced me to from her own background, something which is near and dear to me during this holiday season. And that is going through stories in preparation for Advent. So, Bree, do you grow up with these stories in your family? You grew up with these stories in your own family tradition?
Oh, well, yes. So when I was, I would say, like middle school, my grandma gave my mom this book of stories. Was illustrated, it had those cute little baby chubby angels that you would see in 1990s drawings. And so, yeah, they had stories and different hymns that went with them. And it was just, we read them every Christmas. And it's something that stuck with me because I feel stories are so powerful in our lives, and especially during this time of year.
Yeah, what's really fun about this is there's a lot of classic stories here that used to be very well known, like The Little Match Girl and others, Gifts of the Magi, things like that. We won't get to all of them, of course. But what's unique about them is I grew up with some, but not all of these. And you were, as you are in many cases in my life, Bree, you're the one who introduced me to some of these classics of literature. So it's exciting because I feel like you have been passing on a bit of a torch from generation to generation a little bit. So you are embodying the bard today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. I mean, stories are how we remember our traditions. Before we could write properly as humanity, we told stories to each other. I mean, that's how you have so many different types of, religions, different pantheons, different cultural stories from different places like Greece, Scandinavian, different things like that. So stories are so important even today.
Yeah. And well, it goes to show that, you and I from different faith traditions, different faith backgrounds, obviously, can appreciate these texts as being central. What's amazing about these texts, these stories that we're about to, imbibe, is that we're also written from people, usually from very different faith traditions from our own. I don't think they were necessarily from either a Roman or a Lutheran background, or, in your case, more of a polytheistic background. But they still have in their heart of hearts the ring of truth, as it were, that anyone I think can really appreciate, anyone can really love.
Yeah, it's definitely I love them so much because it's one of those things when you have scent attached to something. For example, you smell pine cone, you may think of Christmas. You read these stories. I mean, I feel like they took at the heart, and they definitely remind us of the holidays and what the season is all about. Even just different people. I mean, for example, myself, I come from, I'm pagan. And during this time, we celebrate Yule, which is a returning of the light. But we also celebrate the darkness because without the darkness, there would not be light. And so it's just the celebration of Thanksgiving and, happy that things are coming back, great gratitude, and so forth. Those different things still resonate throughout many different cultures and many different religions.
Yeah, so, and what's interesting is you use the term Thanksgiving, the word Eucharist, for what Jesus does in the breaking of the bread, making his body and blood present.
Mm-hmm.
That word in the Greek is ad Eucharistes, or Eucharist, which
Mm-hmm.
literally is translated as Thanksgiving.
Yes.
And what I think is really funny, right, is if you look at any story, the line between parable and story is essentially where that moral is found, or where we can find Eucharist in it. So I'm a Eucharist hunter. I'm looking for Eucharist everywhere. Now, granted, I'm biased. It's kind of my job to provide Eucharist, and yet I think the thing about it is we are so sometimes focused on the altar and the linens in life, whatever that is for us, that we forget finding the presence of Eucharist in perhaps the places that are a little less obvious, in a cup of coffee with friends, and
Yeah.
walk in a park, and the sound of the birds and the rustle of the wind and the crunch of the snow, or if it was earlier, it would be leaves beneath our heels.
Yes.
And so what I'm excited about is, where is my Yeshua, Jesus, the Eucharist, in these narratives for me. And
Mhm.
the funny thing about it is, let's put it this way: I've shared these stories with you along my journey as you share them with yours, and we've grown in them and through them. So I'm hoping that people can grow according to their following of the living light. The Hebrew culture would call it the Or Elyon, the higher light, as we open up these texts. So Bree, where do you want to begin with? What story do you want to
Oh,
start with?
so this was a hard decision, because I love all of them so much, but I feel like we should definitely start with a more familiar text, something that is definitely more Christian, but I still love it so much, no matter where it comes from. So the one we're gonna read today, and hopefully my image will stay because I'm gonna flip to a different app. It is called The Cobbler and His Guest. So let's see if my image remains. If not, you can just listen to me. But The Cobbler and His Guest is a small little story about a man who's seeking to see God and to have him visit him and to have his spirit during this time of year. So it's a very, very heartwarming story. All right, so the cobbler and his guest. There once lived in the city of Marseille an old shoemaker, loved and honored by his neighbors, who affectionately called him Father Martin. One Christmas Eve, as he sat alone in his little shop, reading of the visit of the wise men to the infant Jesus and of the gifts they brought him, he said to himself, if tomorrow were the first Christmas, and if this Jesus were to be born in Marseille, this night I know what I would give him. He rose from his stool and took from a shelf overhead two tiny shoes of softest snow white leather with bright silver buckles. I would give him these, my finest work. Then he paused and reflected. But I am a foolish old man, he continued. The master has no need of my poor gifts. Replacing the shoes, he blew out the candle and retired to rest. Hardly had he closed his eyes, it seemed, when he heard a voice call his name. Martin, Martin. Intuitively, he felt a presence. Then the voice spoke again. Martin, you have wished to see me. Tomorrow I shall pass by your window. If you see me and bid me enter, I shall be your guest at your table. Father Martin did not sleep that night for joy, and before it was yet dawn, he rose and swept and tidied up his little shop. He spread fresh sand upon the floor and wreathed green boughs of fir along the rafters. On the spotless linen covered table, he placed a loaf of white bread, a jar of honey, and a pitcher of milk. When all was in readiness, he took up his patient vigil at the window. Presently he saw an old street sweeper pass by, blowing upon his thin, gnarled hands to warm them. Poor fellow, he must be half frozen, thought Father Martin. Opening the door, he called out to him, come in, my friend, come in and warm yourself, and drink something hot. And the man gratefully accepted the invitation. As hour passed, and Martin saw a young, miserably clothed woman carrying a baby, she paused wearily to rest in the shelter of his doorway. The heart of the old cobbler was touched. Quickly he flung open the door. Come in, warm! Come in and warm yourself while you rest, he said to her. You do not look well. He remarked, I am going to the hospital. I hope they will take me in and my baby boy, she explained. My husband is at sea, and I am ill, without a soul. Poor child, cried Father Martin. You must eat something while you are getting warm. No? Then give a cup of milk to the little one. Ah, what a bright, pretty little fellow he is. Why, you have put no shoes on his feet. I have no shoes for him, sighed the mother. Then he shall have this lovely pair I finished yesterday. And Father Martin took down from the shelf the soft little snow-white shoes he had admired the evening before. He slipped them on the child's feet. They fit perfectly, and shortly the poor young mother went on her way, two shoes in her hand and tearful with gratitude. And Father Martin resumed his post at the window. Hour after hour went by, and although many people passed his window, and although many people shared the hospitality of the old cobbler, the expected guest did not appear. It was only a dream, he sighed, with a heavy heart. I did hope and believe, but he has not come. Suddenly, so it seemed to his weary eyes, the room was flooded with strong light, and to the cobbler's astonished vision, there appeared before him, one by one, the poor street sweeper, the sick mother and her child, and all the people whom he had aided during the day. Each smiled at him and said, have you not seen me? Did I not sit at your table? Then they vanished from his vision. At last, one out of the silence, Father Martin heard again the gentle voice repeating the old familiar words. Whoever shall receive one such in my name receiveth me. For I was hungered, and ye gave me meat. I was thirsty, and ye gave me drink. I was a stranger, and ye took me in. Verily, I say unto you, inasmuch as you have done it unto the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me. The end.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite stories. It just um
One of the things I missed
mhm.
was, for example, the honorific for Father Martin, obviously. So it's interesting
Yes.
the way in which I think the text is pointing to the priesthood of all believers, the priesthood of every person who acts with love and charity towards their neighbor, and with a sincerity of heart. And then what's also fascinating on my end is, and I think you might appreciate this from your more polytheistic background.
Mm-hmm.
In classical literature, it's a common motif for the gods to show up in disguise and to somewhat
Yes.
to see how things are going down there, as it were.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm thinking, the a harsh example would be like, I think it was, Zeus disguising himself to visit, Lycamp, the one who's turned into a wolf ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
Or Athena disguising herself, interestingly enough, as a male traveler in the Odyssey to kind of give Telemachus a kick in the rump to get him going, to look for his father. And here's the funny thing, right? The New Testament takes that idea. No matter our understanding of the New Testament, everybody knows where I come from. I'm the guy wearing the collar here. But it takes that idea and says, well, what if God appears? I use the term disguise lightly.
Mhm.
I'm gonna use it imprecisely for a moment. What if God shows up in disguise, not in a pillar of fire or in a pillar of smoke? What if first he shows up as a baby? And then not only the baby in the manger, obviously, the incarnate,
Mhm.
but why not in our neighbor? And that kind of then raises for me the ultimate question then, in terms of intentionality and our intentionality with our neighbors. Where do we see the Eucharist? And my love is he puts out bread. I'm like, you know what I'm thinking? Like, oh, dude, you're gonna put out wine,
No, he puts out milk.
milk and honey.
Well, so if you think about it, a lot of verses, especially when they're talking about, like homeliness, being welcome. I mean, the wine really isn't like they talk about a land of milk and honey. The
Yeah.
people, it's so nourishing and so I would say almost like because wine is great. I like wine, don't get me wrong. But if you're wanting to welcome a guest, I feel like especially if you're wanting to really show, because if you think about it, especially back then in Marseille, milk and honey, like, I mean, that was something that you would have to either keep fresh. You would need to find a friend who has a cow, or who would be able to give you that milk, and then the honey was also, so all of these symbols, however humble they might look to us today, they're quite something.
Well, it's interesting because when I think of milk and honey, obviously I'm thinking of, and I think the author is too, probably steeped in the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament. That
Yes.
the idea of the promised land, right? The presence
Yeah.
of God live. But also, it's interesting that we give children milk, we give
Mm-hmm.
children honey. So there's this idea here, and I think it kind of was interesting from my vantage point, that there's a sense in which until I am willing to play like a child or realize my
Mm-hmm.
limitations like a child, unless I'm willing to enter into that childlike state, I cannot enter into the gates of that kind of sense of playful wonder.
Yes.
And I certainly, like, as I'm no clergy person preparing for the manicness of Christmas, and the fact that this is not necessarily, the tra la la lallying. Instead, it's a bit like, oh, man, they get the sermon together for Sunday. Um, what
Yeah.
it's interesting to me, right, is what this story for me is saying. Stop. You want the new creation. A child is the sign of creation, right? Of new birth. You want new birth in your life. However you want to define that second birth or new birth. Um, well, if you stop and look close enough, there are miracles literally all around you. God is literally walking all around you. Divinity is all around you. If only you'll stop and actually listen.
Yes. Well, and that's the interesting thing. So going back to being a child, um, so as a pagan and as a person who, I definitely would call myself, I practice, magic. Um, Sometimes people have a hard time with that because it seems so silly. But honestly, the thing about life is that as adults, we take it a bit too seriously. I mean, it does need to be taken seriously at some points in time, but having the ability to play, to find happiness, and to, find the ability to worship, but also have that worship not be so fearful, and have it, I'm so grateful for you, God. You are my father. I can play with you. I mean, one of my favorite books, it's called The Cry of the Ice Mark, and it's very potent because her father they're in a war and her father has to die, and so she thinks about him as a king because he is the king, but then she remembers him as her father, the man who played mountain bears, who roared and ran down hallways with her. A father is a parent, and I mean, yes, you need to have rules, but there's also the joy and the playfulness. And I, as an adult, I need that in my life because honestly, I do sometimes take myself and my life too seriously, and it feels like I become so rigid, and I feels like I become so unbent. And I don't want that in my life. I really want to enjoy my life and have it be playful. So yes, I do practice magic. It's silly, it's fun, but it's one of the ways that I connect to deity. It's, and it's same thing with for Christians. I feel like finding a way to have fun, because I mean, I know for a lot of people this time of year, especially Christmas, can be very hard because it feels like so much pressure is placed on people to be, excuse me, be perfect. be able to give the right gifts, do the right things, go to all these different, things. But like you were saying earlier, if we just take a second, take a walk through the woods, if you have woods, go to a park, just breathe, because the season is here for a reason. I rhymed, did not mean to, but finding joy in the small things. I mean, it's so worth it. And then I feel like you can find joy in the things that you're doing for others. I feel like service to others should not feel like you're martyring yourself. Service to others should feel like you are not only giving them a gift, but you're giving yourself a gift.
And what's really powerful about what you said about the idea of playing with God as Father, God as parent, that seems to be one of the elements that all the mystics of the medieval tradition and all the mystics, particularly of the post 16th century tradition, really are trying to gain here. It's interesting that the guy's name is Father Martin, right? The discovery of the idea of grace. And grace is not just this theological idea, but the idea that if I'm in the presence of one who is beloved to me, as you are a beloved friend to me, or if I am in the presence of any cherished person in my life, there is an instant ease. There is an instant sense in which I can be goofy. I could even cast about myself crass jokes. I could begin to personify roles and figure, almost miming, almost like in a theatrical performance, things that have happened to us or things that we've imagined. And that's closer to a child playing with toys. Like I would dress up in toy armor and run through the backyard. Or it's closer to like me at the Renaissance in a lot of ways. Although it's ironically wearing my official stuff at the fair, I get a lot of great conversation actually. But the thing about it is, it's closer to that, and I think closer to our encounter with the Word made flesh than necessarily I'm going to go through a litany of do's and don'ts, or I'm going to see God as an abstract ideal. What's funny is the revelation of God as Father, God as Abba, literally Daddy, in the New Testament, is this wondrous awakening that the one with whom I have to do is not only present to me as author or creator, or fill in all the blanks, but someone who wants to spend time with me. And what I love about the word magic too, that you're describing here, a lot of people do, oh, magic?
I know.
But here's the funny thing. J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis would be leaping for joy. And the reason why they'd be leaping for joy, right, is it's funny what they say of the character Galadriel, right? Oh, I'm so sorry. Let me mute that. Okay. There we go. You have Galadriel, right? And she says at one point, or one of the elves in Lorien, I'm not quite sure, Master Samwise Gamgee, what you mean by the word magic, because you often use it to describe the hidden beauty of all things in creation. And you also will use it about the same deeds of the enemies, Sauron. And the reality is, right, what is the deep magic in Narnia, in Lewis? It's love. It's love that conquers death. So the thing about it is, when I'm praying the rosary, if I'm doing the rosary right, if I'm praying the rosary correctly, I'm not worried about whether I got the do's or don'ts. I'm not worried whether I'm walking with Mary and I'm walking with Jesus.
Yeah.
Or if I'm really reading the Psalms right, I'm crying out to someone who's in the room. But in a personal relationship, I'm not going to be reciting these words as if I need to reach someone who's up there and I need to drag them down here. God, it's been a long time, man.
Hello. I mean, if this doesn't work, you can try, writing letters to each other or something. But no, literally, it's connecting with deity personally, because it is all around us. God is all around us. God is here with us. And I mean, going back to the fun, and we're looking at a scientific thing. Scientifically, it has been shown that adults who color in coloring books are less stressed than those who don't. So if we're taking it,
Yes.
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 So I mean, having fun and allowing fun in your life and allowing your worship, I mean, yes, you can definitely treat like, and how we look at it in paganism is that you're working with a god. You treat them the way you would treat, somebody you're going into a relationship with, as a friend. You are respectful, and you listen. But then, I mean, friends always have fun. I mean, I don't know about you, but I go on, coffee trips with my friends. We go to Renaissance fairs. We play Dungeons and Dragons. That is
Yes.
my, and it's full of love and laughter and light. And so why would you not want to have I mean, they talk about it, having a friend in Jesus, having a friend in God.
Yes.
How would you want to treat your friend?
Which then comes full circle to me, to the way in which we would approach the Christ Mass. Because if the Mass or the divine liturgy, the Eucharist, if that event simply is rote and empty ritual, well, for crying out loud, it might do some good, but I'm not quite sure how much good, and frankly, it could be a bit terrible. But if I'm approaching with joy in my heart, a very dear friend, a very dear father, a very dear brother, a very dear spirit, then what that fundamentally does is I should then approach everyone around me as a potential spiritual mother, spiritual father, spiritual sibling, spiritual, well, spiritual spirit, but and
But yeah, exactly. It's like how Jesus taught, like, love your neighbor, love the pagans, love the people who are not of your religion. I mean, because honestly, if you're spreading love and light, and going back to scientific stuff, there is a certain vibration that people give off that is found when people do give off, when they're in a loving like state, when they are feeling that connection with other people. And I mean, again, it's really good for you.
But and here's the funny thing: if I speak to, but you don't realize, perhaps maybe you do, because you've often been deeper into the cosmic ocean, and then I usually catch up with you, and then I catch up to a mountain, and then you sail above the mountain, and then I catch wings. It's one of the deepest gifts of friendships for many, many, many long years. But the very things you were saying, if I sat down with Mother Teresa at Calcutta, she was still with us. Rather similar.
Yes.
If I sat down with Francis of Assisi and I understood, why are you giving away your possessions here? It would say with the same playfulness, something rather similar in a lot of different ways. I think in today's polarizing, divisive climate, when everybody is so much in their box, what the story today, riffing on Matthew chapter 25, the sermon, what you did on the least of these, in awesome King Jamesy English, by the way, I had goosebumps.
I try. I like Shakespeare. You know that.
I will talk like Shakespeare when I don't have to, as you very well know. But like the thing about it is, what that indicates is, do you want to change the world? It may not be granting on social media, I'm sorry to say. It's not going to be in your echo chamber on Instagram, I'm sorry to say. It's okay, elections. Yeah, elections are important. I get it, but that should not, forgive me for getting into the pulpit for a moment. That's not the ultimate place of meaning in our lives. The ultimate place of meaning in our lives is the way we love.
Yes.
And the way we love will affect whether we used to quote Les Miserables, to love another person is to see the face of God.
Yes.
It's going to determine, are we actually aware of ourselves? St. Augustine, who I love Augustine, I urge everybody to read as our title that kind of sounds kind of weird, called The Confessions. It's actually Augustine's coming to faith story.
Oh, love it.
Yeah, and his coming to faith story in the 4th century, he literally rebels from like this fundamentalist home, becomes basically a pagan philosopher, and then discovers Christianity along the way. What's curious about Augustine is he says, God, you're always with me. If I ascend into the mountains, you are there. If I make my bed in the underworld, you are there. So I can't run away from you, God. You're always there. It's not I who is absent from you. It was I who was absent from myself. And
Yeah.
when I become boring and dry and rigid and unloving and a bit Scrooge-like in my life, it's because I am absent from myself, truly. And then
Yeah.
and then I remember to pick up a plastic sword or plastic, and then I remember to eat some chocolate. I'm like, yeah, bring it on.
Well, and going back to what you were saying about changing the world, I can't remember the author, but I read it once. It said, "Oh, once was a man, and in the beginning of his life, he wanted to change the world, and he tried different things. However, it didn't work. So he got a bit older, and he decided, okay, I won't change the world. I will change my country." Again, he tried different avenues, no success, and he was getting older. And so he's like, okay, I cannot change my country. I will try and change my hometown. Again, many years passed and he was not succeeding. And he finally was like, okay, fine. If I cannot change my country, the world, my town, I will try and change my neighborhood. And now he was in his golden years and he, felt defeated. And one day he had to sit and he looked in himself and he's like, if I cannot change the world, my nation, my country, my hometown, my neighborhood, what can I change? And he realized he could change himself.
Yes.
That is very powerful. And it makes me, I'm not angered about the divisiveness in our country right now or in the world. It just makes me very sad because I I truly do strive. I mean, and I'm not perfect, but I do strive to love my neighbor. I strive to volunteer. I strive to do things that would better myself as well as my community because I value my community here. I'm in a small town and and I find that in small towns you can find some of the best people. Not that they don't exist in bigger cities, but it seems like a more stronger mesh of a community here. And so for myself, I am trying to work on myself so that I can better myself, so that I can better my community, I can better my hometown, I can better my nation, I can better the world. But it starts with me. I mean, like Michael Jackson said, make a change. Look at the
Yes.
it's
Yes.
it's you.
Thank you.
So, I mean, that was a bit of a tangent, but
No, it's not. I think that's it. And so this was the original, and it's here's the funny element is I'm coming from a Roman Catholic background, studying to be a Lutheran priest, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. My story is
mhm.
complicated, and of course, with medieval Viking armor in this apartment here, um, and then a bag full of runes somewhere elsewhere. Um, the thing about it is, in that kind of Tolkienic mode, why is it that originally the sacrament of the confessional, which is, by the way, dropped by Luther in the Reformation, although Luther wanted it maintained, he wanted
Mhm.
it to go on. Why was it that it first began with Irish monks? Got to hand it to my Irish folk.
Mm,
Instead of it being a list of okay, say these prayers in exchange, say this penance, why did it begin for them having a spiritual mentor, literally a spiritual Abba, father, with whom they had a conversation, or in many cases, a motherly figure, opening
mhm.
up and having a kind of dialogue, a self-evaluation. The idea of that original long-form self-evaluation that you see in the early Irish penitentials, which are wildly misunderstood, was to initially say that you, like Brendan the Navigator, are on a journey. You're on a voyage, dare I say, into the West. But you don't know what's there beyond the West. And so as you're rowing, the key is not a kind of neurotic, you know, look down at what you've done, kind of like
Yeah.
this. Instead, it's a matter of, okay, if I continually hone these spiritual muscles, I will be able to play with greater frequency. If I continue to focus on my spiritual hygiene, I know that when I'm able to stand before love, I can play without feeling like I'm locked down. I guess the
Yeah.
trouble there, and this is always the temptation, is that if I'm so focused on changing myself, do I forget to play with my neighbor? Do I forget to play with the creator, with Abba? And I
Yeah.
think the thing is, we won't forget that if we remember that we're talking to a person, if we remember we have a personal kind of covenantal experience.
Yeah.
And I think that only happens when you have an Aubree Helton in your lives who calls you up and says, John, in addition to making sure that the wreaths were correct and you got the doors on the church right and that you took care of the parish finance committee that week, did you bother to have a cup of good warm cider with your wife and sing Christmas carols to the infant Christ and do a little bit of a dance off in the backyard? You know, like
Yeah,
we
it's important. Balance. I've always toted balance is important. Because well, if you can't do something for yourself that renews your, your spirit, then you are going to be, going to keep on giving and giving. It's I believe it's called the rescuer's dilemma. If you do not take care of yourself, how are you going to take care of others when you need to help them? So finding different things. I mean, for me, for example, I had a lovely fireside chat with some friends and it was super cozy, also very cold because Wyoming. But we had cider and we had like was it pumpkin? I think we had pumpkin spice donuts. It was delightful, but it was so simple. But that really, whew, that really helped because this month, like for everybody else, it's crazy for me, absolutely nuts. But I mean, finding ways to find joy and just stop and pause. I mean, and it's different for everybody. For some people, it's getting their nails done if they're, if they like that, or some people it's, listening to meditation. Finding that and also finding grace for yourself, able to always do stuff. For example, I like to pull tarot. I have not pulled this week. Let me think, I pulled once. But I like to have that as one of my daily practices in a way for me to kind of ground myself and be like, okay, Aubree, yes, we are traveling at 1,000 miles an hour, but let's stop for a second and just do something for ourselves and to connect with deity, to connect with spirit, to ground and center. So yes, and I have throughout the years harped on you about that because you do pull yourself in 1,000 different directions, and sometimes I'm so glad Sam is there because she can now remind you to also hopefully find some way to give yourself grace and to find peace and find spiritual renewal for yourself.
I think one of the fascinating elements behind spiritual renewal is the fact that the story begins with someone who's a cobbler. Cobbler makes shoes. You use,
Yeah.
you use shoes for a journey.
Yes.
And he also begins the story by saying, if I was present at the first, at the incarnation, at the manger, and of course, who shows up there? Like the wise men who travel from a long distance, and yet this shoemaker, this person who enables other people to travel, he never leaves the flippity shop the entire time, does he? Right? He goes on a journey standing still.
Yes.
He doesn't go out to find God. God comes to find him.
Yes.
And I think that's something which I find, if we could recover that for Christmas, that every Christ Mass is God coming to find us. It's not so much needing to the other way around.
Yeah. Well, Father Martin also asks. He says, I wish I could see him. And I feel like that's the thing, is like asking. One of my favorite things, I can't remember which chapter it is. But I remember it was a father and he had a son, and the son was having seizures, and Christ went to him and he said, do you believe? And the father said, I'm paraphrasing, I do not know, but can you please help my unbelief? Because I mean, and if he asked him to help him. I mean, and that's the biggest thing, asking for help from God, from deity, from pretty much anybody. It's difficult because we have to set aside our ego, our pride. And so the fact that Father Martin asked for help, he asked to see him. He said, oh, I would love to see him. I would love to be there. And God answered him. It's like, okay, here you go. And maybe not in the way that Father Martin expected, but he in the end got to experience the love and the power of God.
One of the the most beautiful elements that you described there is from, and particularly from the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, after the transfiguration, you're right, he comes down, Jesus comes down the mountain. And there, of course, we have a boy with seizures, described in the text as a demoniac, and the father comes, and yeah, he's, you know, at least one translation, I believe it's the King James or New King James has it, you know, I believe, but help my unbelief.
Yes.
Which I, you know, I think could be beautifully summarized as you're putting this in the most human terms. I believe, but there's a part of me that is still clinging on to unbelief. Which
Yes.
I think for a lot of us in prayer, even people who've been praying a long time, if you got a bad medical report, it's understandable in this place to basically be like, God, like I want to ask you for help,
Yeah.
but can I actually ask you? Is that a bit, you know? Or there was once a child, in much more beautiful in my terms, who asked the nun Mother Angelica, hey, you know, Mother, can I ask God about an ice cream sundae? Is that too trivial for me to ask about? And she says, of course you can ask about that. What I love, though, is the caveat that you added. And the caveat is God is going to respond. It's not that God isn't going to, he is going to respond, but maybe not in the way we expect.
Yes.
And that sense of the unexpectedness, Aslan in the Chronicles of Narnia is a good, but he's not a tame lion.
Yes.
And I love that as people are passing by, as Jesus passes by in the New Testament texts, what leads Father Martin to reach out to God in these souls isn't necessarily like, oh wow, he looked at them, and in that moment, he heard the still small voice that he heard in the dreams. No, it says his heart was moved with compassion. So the moving of compassion in anyone's heart, whether they realize it or not, is the voice of God. That when I have a stirring in my heart, and I think everybody, including an atheist, has a stirring in their heart.
Yeah.
This, right? Like if I have a stirring in my heart, I see myself in them right there. That principle seems to be for me. And you know, people can call me crazy. It's okay. It wouldn't be the first time. Really wouldn't be the first time. But as someone who plays at the feet of my Abba, I believe that is the voice of God speaking to us.
Yes.
Around the clock, 24/7, all the time. It isn't that he doesn't pull the veil back and speak a little more directly. Of course that happens. I do believe that can happen. And it doesn't mean that we will always be aware of that nudge. I'm going to be honest. I have to remind myself to be aware of that sense of nudging all the time, so I don't get locked in schedules and everything else. Right?
Yes.
But the voices never stop speaking. The question is, have we stopped listening?
Exactly. I mean, and that's the hard part, is because that's something else that for me, my my beliefs and practices that I try, and I have a hard time with this because again, I'm not perfect. I try to listen, and when I'm reading things, because I like to read, and I like to educate myself on the things that I do and so forth. But I really try and just hold myself in a place of grounding and centering and meditation so that I can listen, because in our lives it does get a bit noisy with people and with things, and it's okay. It happens, you know, again, give yourself grace. However, if you can find something each day, each week, something, you know, to like just do a practice, maybe it's a walking meditation or just finding a way to be quiet in your mind, which for me is hard because I think 90 miles an hour. My brain is just a little hamster going on its wheel. I think.
Oh yeah, yeah. Mea culpa there.
Oh yeah, very, very, very much. But it's finding ways to listen to God, to listen to spirit, to just again breathe. It's important to breathe, and finding a way to just stop. And it can be like a 5-minute thing if you have a break at work or something, and you're just like, okay, I'm gonna sit in the bathroom stall and just breathe for a second. Pretty much.
Open confession, I did that a lot during my graduate years. I
Yeah.
really, really did. I literally would go to the bathroom stall and be like, all right, chill out for like 2 minutes. Now
Yes.
I can go back into it. I'm just curious because
Hmm.
you know, and I freely confess this might have been because I recently heard the song Patapan, the Christmas Carol,
Ah, yes, Patapon. I love that song.
where like and it's also French and Marseille,
Hmm.
France, right? This is
Yes.
it's really French. One of the lyrics is, when the wise men came to see the Lord, or something along those lines. It apocryphally adds, but I think beautifully adds, and kind of like the little drummer boy. They had pipes and drums on which to play, toodaloo patapan. Uh,
Yeah.
it's interesting that every generation asks themselves, if I was there at the first Christmas, if I was there, it's like the Renaissance painting, when the patron would literally have themselves painted into the scene. And I am, it saddens me to say this, it upsets me to say this, that in a lot of academic circles in which I walk, even seminary circles,
Hmm.
because there is, with I think only the best of intentions, with only the most positive intentions, it's not because anyone is ill-willed. There is an attempt to say, well, you have these distant historical events, and now we're about social justice now, and that's all we need to do. And I think what the Patapan narrative, what the little drummer boy narrative, and what this narrative, this parable teaches us is that actually uh, the past, the present, and the future for deity, to quote Boethius and C.S. Lewis, they're all right now.
Hmm.
And we, right here, as we were speaking, have an opportunity to enter into that space. I am painted, you are painted into that very scene at the manger, because every single person I'm coming across, it could be a possible equivalent of going up to a poor stable and seeing God in the face of someone who is in a tough situation, or in a tough environment.
Yeah.
That's why the scene with the baby really, I mean, obviously the mother and child iconography here
Yeah.
rips my heart to shreds, because I mean, for me, I find that to be a universal invitation to the foot of the cross and to the foot of the manger. And the invitation, well, what are you going to do about it, John? you know, and I think that's the funny thing about it is, how do we miss the point? I think we miss the point in our contemporary world is because we assume that to enter into that encounter with the logos, with the word, means action on our part first. I love
Hmm.
it. First begins with this story, with someone thinking to themselves and they blowing out a candle and then going to bed. I am so busy with my screens. Good Lord, Aubree, I'm gonna. So sorry to put you as my priest in the confessional booth for a moment.
You're fine. Nope.
Yeah, but like, I will come in the door with Sam, and she's been very good at reminding me about this. God bless my wife; she is the same. Um, Literally so busy about everything
Hmm.
that, after I've done all the ministry work, I collapse on the couch with the TV on, snarfing down dinner, and then we'll crash into bed. And what I find interesting is, where was their meditation before rest there? Where was there an invitation for a prayerful encounter with God? Where was, and what I see here, and I think the reason why I'm saying it is I think a lot of people can relate, being surrounded by screens all the time, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm happy about this technology. I wouldn't be able to do it without it. Our
Yeah.
friendship wouldn't exist without but
Yeah.
there's a sense in which we're tuning out the voice of God. And I wonder how many of us would not have been wise men going on a journey to encounter the presence, because, well, we would have been focused on, to quote another musical, what's the buzz? Tell me what's a happening.
Yeah, it's very hard. I mean, especially excuse me, especially with everything that's going on politically, geopolitically, like in the world, it's very hard to not have our heads turned. And I mean, I'm definitely guilty of this. I have way too much screen time. I watch it every Sunday, and I don't want to look at that. I don't want to look at my screen time, how much I did this week. Um, but I mean, it's definitely like, what did they say about routine? Like, if you're able to do it for 3 weeks, it's pretty much stuck in. So, I don't know, like, if finding a way throughout your busy day to just like take a second, it's very difficult. I mean, for me, like, I usually get up early in the morning because I like early mornings when I actually get up, because that's difficult for me. I really like snuggling in bed with my dog. Um, but I like going outside and seeing how quiet it is and just how, I mean, it's dark here. I get up at like 6 and it's dark, but I appreciate the darkness and how it, it gives me a second to just like, okay, I try and listen to nature and can't really see the stars very well, but if I can manage to see some sort of bright light, if the moon's, hasn't gone down, if it's something like taking a second. I mean,
Mm.
last night for me, it was just reading on Balder, one of the Norse gods, because I was curious about him. And I'm like, okay, let's take a second and we'll just do some attentive reading. And I mean, it's in whatever way you can manage it, but don't feel too hard on yourself, John. You do a lot for yourself and for other people. But
Oh yeah, no, and I want to emphasize, I'm aware of my finiteness. That no one should ever feel the weight of symbol placed on them, for
yeah.
sure. And I think one of the dangers for clergy, and I say this quite candidly, is I think they easily can fall into the trap of perfectionism on one side, and that crushes everything. Or at
Yeah.
some point, there's a kind of sense in which I'm just doing my job. Of course, the thing about it is, I'm talking about the deepest romance. The deepest romance. Sam and I often say it's the Eucharist that brought us together. It's Christ's presence, the breaking of the bread that brought us together. It's really being playful with one's spiritual parent.
Yes.
So I think the thing is, and I want to ask you, forgive me if it's too much. I'm going to totally edit it out.
It's
Like,
okay.
but the thing is, you and I both grew up with the nativity scene. I think your mother has, like me, I think she has a habit of collecting nativity scenes. Memory
Yes.
is true. Um, do you ever end up being playful in front of a nativity scene? I was, or even just being or do you remember a time in which you were ever in a state of wonder, where there was childlike candlelight in front of a nativity scene, or where it's almost as if you did pass through the doors of time, as if you were standing there. I was listening to last night, a mystic who I'm very fond of, Blessed
Mhm.
Father Solanus Casey, who was seen by one of his brother monks secretly in the chapel Christmas Eve in front of the tabernacle, the chest containing the bread and wine,
Mhm.
in front of the nativity scene, playing his violin. And he was a horrible violin player. God used him to perform freaking miracles, like, healing the sick. But man, his violin playing squeaky. Everyone said, "Oh, good Lord." But he was playing his heart out before the tabernacle and before the nativity scene, because he believed he was really there. And maybe this is just a John thing, but man, I'm just curious if you've ever had the experience. Like,
Uh,
I'm in front of the nativity scene, and I'm like, "Yo, I don't know why I'm bawling like a baby right now."
yeah, definitely. So there's actually one of the stories that I have in my book. It's called Keeping Baby Warm, where there's a nativity scene and there's a little boy and he's fiddling with it and his mom's like, oh no, what is he doing? And so she looks and he folded a napkin around, like a little tissue around the baby Jesus to keep him warm. And that definitely like resounded. I'm just like, oh my gosh, yes. So I mean, yeah, I've always loved my mom's different nativity scenes because I mean, she's gotten ones that are very elaborate, ones that are so stark that they're just it's like rough carvings of Mary, Joseph, a couple of lambs, maybe a wise man, and obviously Jesus. And I love what I really love about it is I love the different kinds you see and how the interpretation is there. I definitely like I've always just loved looking at them and thinking about it and I mean, yeah, definitely, like, especially when I was a kid, thinking about what it'd be like to be there, in person and just see it. Just, I mean, like, and then the historical part of me is like, oh yeah, that'd be cool. Because I love that. But yeah, I mean, definitely I've had thoughts about that. And then, I mean, and going back to now, so one of the things that pagans do for Yule's, we have a Yule log. We place candles on there, and you can be very intentional. And I think about it because, I mean, what Yule is all about is bringing back the light and appreciating it. And I mean, like, the part that I love about it is just the celebration, the absolute joy that comes along with that, and the thankfulness, and like dancing around and being joyful. And I really appreciate that part of Yule. So it's definitely feeling playful and feeling just so grateful for the holiday and how it manifests for you.
I love what you say about seeing the variety of nativity scenes and
Yeah.
then bringing back the light, because it's in the variety reminds me of the end of the story that we just heard, and all the
Yeah.
neighbors passing by. One's elderly, one's a mother, one's a baby, right? The
Yeah.
almost the different stages of life in reverse, curiously enough.
I know it's
Um, which,
it's
by the way, I think that says something about time. I'm like, yo, what kind of astrophysics is hidden in this thing? This Benjamin Button, Uh, but what I mentioned there, well, the reason why I go there is, if I stand in front of the Ethiopian nativity scene, it's painted in that culture.
yes.
If I stand in a Latin American nativity scene, it's painted in that culture.
Yes.
Um, and yet, the face of the same Mary is behind those many faces. The face of the same Joseph is behind those many faces. And the face of the same Jesus is behind those many faces.
Yes.
And there's something so cosmically not archetypal, because I think it's still personal, but there's
Yeah.
something so transcendently imminent there that it trains my heart to sit at the feet of love and
Mhm.
wonder, okay, going back to the little drummer boy image, um, what if I played my best for him?
Yes.
What if he didn't necessarily care whether my best was me sounding like Hans Zimmer or like Axl Rose, or film any great musical artist, right? But what if playing my best friend was just playing like Solanas Casey, playing his violin for the tabernacle and not being a great violin player? What if it is in that sense of being playful again,
Yeah.
just utterly pouring out love, pouring out myself? Because I think many of us don't pour. We, I think we in the West generally struggle with pouring out our authentic selves before the foot of God. And
Yeah. And I think it's difficult for some people because even though Christ does say, "Come as you are," like sometimes, especially with, I mean, different religions, sometimes it can feel like what they say, what different churches, what they say, it feels like it does not actually mean you can come as you are. And so I feel like sometimes that's difficult. If the people you're listening to say that, well, no, God expects this and this and this of you. But I agree, you should come as you are. I mean, um, you should be able to, like, come in any way you can. I mean, one of the things that I love about paganism, and one of the biggest reasons why I really went to it, is because there's a saying, there is no one true way. As long as you can come to deity, it's like, I think about it as like, deity, God is a lake or an ocean, and there are different rivers and different ways to get to him, but you can get to him or them or her, whatever you want to say. And so being able to be vulnerable with yourself and reach out and offer, okay, I believe a little bit, but please help my unbelief. Please help me so that I can come to you, because I want to be your friend. I want to play with you. I want to experience your love, and I want to, you know, be with you in your fold, and so forth.
yeah, well, and of course, many of my colleagues will be like, "Oh, John, why aren't you saying in response to Aubree, Jesus said, 'I am the way, the truth, and the life'?" And I think my response would be, well, look at the text that was just quoted in Matthew 25 in our story, where in the last judgment, Jesus draws forth all people. And in bringing forth all people, the question he asked them was, did you feed me when I was hungry? Did you clothe me when I was naked? Were you present for me when I was imprisoned unjustly?
Yes.
They'll ask you, well, where did we see you in those situations? Well, what you did to the least of these, my brethren.
You have done it.
And we see in the parable of the Good Samaritan, where obviously you have a man beaten in the middle of the road. He's half dead. You have the high priest and you have the Levite walking on past. The high priest and the Levite, by the way, they have the right theology. On paper, they believe according to the covenantal system. They believe in the one true God, and they have the right theology, but they do not have compassion. Yes. And they walk right on by. I like to reframe the parable, because when we read a good Samaritan goes on by, in ancient Jewish terms, that's like in some circles saying, and then the good atheist came on by.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And he gets, on paper, you'd say, well, I don't really know. Don't think their theology is right. Samaritans were a combination of polytheism mixed with a little bit of Judaism, there's cultural elements, right? But he sees the beaten man in the middle of the road, and he sees his neighbor. He gets right off his donkey, right? Carries him into the inn, pours oil and wine on his wounds as disinfectant, but also points to the sacraments, right? And there's this moment in which Jesus is ultimately asking the religious leaders, which of these loved their neighbor? Well, the one who did good. Yeah. Sorry about that. That is the local foghorn.
That's okay. That's cool.
I have ritual Sam. When the horn goes off locally, we'll shout, "The beacons of Gondor are lit."
Oh, yes.
We'll answer. But
yes, I definitely agree with you. I mean, honestly, and this is definitely probably something that, some Christians don't agree with, but I feel like as long as you are doing your best to be good to yourself, your neighbor, and those around you, as long as you have your good intentions and you're trying very hard to embody, morality and kindness and giving, I honestly feel like you're a good person. That's probably goes against some people, and it's difficult. And I'm not like, if someone were to reject my philosophy, I wouldn't be angry. I'd be a little sad, but I would understand, because again, with my path, I accept that you walk a different path from me, but that does not mean that we have to be angry against each other. That does not mean that we cannot talk and have fun, dissertations about it. I mean, we've talked about religion so much in our friendship, but it's always been done, I feel, with the spirit of, okay, let's go for this. Let's talk about it. But it's never been, I hope, it's never been any sort of, an anger or in trying, an opposition or anything like that. And I feel like, I hope eventually that's how all discourse, whether it's religious, political, anything, can be done in a sense of, okay, I want to hear your side of things.
And many more in the world where you could have your heart about that. We would be living 2 steps away from the Garden of Eden. To quote Jesus, I'd say, "You are not far from the kingdom of heaven" on that front, right? Because if I'm to confess that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, which I believe, right? One thing I've always pointed out is, okay, then who is Christ? And if you say he's God, I believe that there is a certain Bible verse that would point out God is love.
Yes.
And I do think the irony is, if love is the way, love is the truth, love is the life, the question really then comes down to, am I actually love? Am I actually being loving? I think one of the dangerous things in our culture is the element that in the name of inclusivity, I'm not going to name the political institution, But in the name of inclusivity, there can often be the perspective of all opinions are welcome except the one that disagrees. And what you beautifully embody, you've embodied in our friendship from the very beginning. You embody in the way you love everyone around you, Bree, is a thirst to understand them, a thirst to hear where their heart is, not necessarily to agree with their heart, but the thirst to understand where are they coming from.
Yes.
And it's that authentic, real compassion to suffer with, or experience with, or to dare to dream with. That's something I hope to recapture, in the experience of the institution that I think many are craving the most, but also are understandably fleeing from, because a lot of people who look like this, unfortunately, are, not necessarily the most authentically hospitable. Let's put it that way.
Well, I mean, it's hard. I mean, don't get me wrong. I am not the beacon of light and love. I definitely have my disagreements with people. But I do, for the most part, really try, oh, that's Bishop. He's spiritual. I do.
I also love the fact he's named Bishop, your dog. Like for me, that just warms my heart. I think your bishop will be far more understanding in his desire for walkies. Than many of my own religious.
I definitely talk to him all the time. We're very close. It's, I love my bishop. He's great. In fact, I have a funny story. My grandma, because when I first got him, I was telling her, oh yeah, I have a bishop. I have a dog named Bishop. She just heard I have a bishop, and she's like, oh, you do? Because I love my grandma, but she's very much not a fan of me being pagan, which I'm okay with. That's fine. And she's like, oh, I'm so happy to hear that. And then later, I think Mom clarified it for her, and she was like, oh, okay. Which I'm like, that's fine, So, but I do love my.
Well, I would be excited to get what their take on our, if you ever wanted some of these podcasts at any point, because I think the really funny element is people have forgotten how to talk to each other. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And what I love about it is if I pointed out all the ways in which a dog can connect different people.
Yes.
Like a puppy passing through a space. I was on a line in one of the most tense political periods in our recent American history.
Yes.
Everybody was carrying signs. They were all upset and they were looking gloomily at each other. And then along comes a chihuahua. And suddenly everybody's like, oh, you're so cute. Oh my God. Look, I need to run, Bree, but this is brilliant.
Wonderful. I'm excited to do another one.
Yes.
Hopefully,
by all means, Bree. Thank you deeply. And by the way, I love this. I cannot wait to post. Thank you.
It was great. You're welcome. All right. Bye.
Right on.